At 12:30, a group of women are going to block the junction of Camden High Street and Parkway and have a 4-minute die-in.
Well, at the moment, I just feel very scared. And as far as I know, what we're about to do is, when the traffic lights go green at some point, we're going to try and stop the traffic so that people will realise we'll be there for 4 minutes, so that drivers and the rest of the public will know that that's all the time they've got after there's a warning to save their lives and their children.
Do this one, shall we? Yeah. It's back. Come on, come on.
This is a 4-minute warning. In the event of a nuclear war, you will have 4 minutes in which to gain a place of safety for you and your family. This is to remind you how short a time that is. This will allow you approximately 4
Well, I think you always feel nervous before you take part in an action. However, once you start, there's a feeling of exhilaration, a feeling of comradeship, a feeling that we are actually doing something to demonstrate how we feel and to draw attention. We want other people to say, why are those people lying down in the road? And then to ask us afterwards so we can tell them. Sometimes it's necessary to break the law. I could say to any woman, you have a vote and I have a vote. And many years ago, a group of women broke the law, and that is why you have a vote and I have a vote.
That's right, like she started.
This is a 4-minute warning. In the event of a nuclear war, you will have 4 minutes in which to gain a place of safety for you and your family.
My name is Dawn Atkinson. I have been standing with Women in Black at Sydney Town Hall since before the invasion of Afghanistan. Women in Black is a worldwide network of women of many ethnic, religious and cultural backgrounds seeking peace and social justice throughout the world. We build bridges across the differences women may have in the hope of finding peace and social justice.
I should be standing here today telling you that the world has changed, that we live in an increasingly uncertain world where terror is lurking behind and within us, justifying wars akin to the constant state of war present in George Orwell's 1984. However, this is not what I am here to say. George Bernard Shaw was right when he said that we learn from history that we learn nothing from history, which exemplifies that despite insistence to the contrary, war is no more inevitable today than it had been throughout the darker pages of our human history. Times have changed, yes, but people have not. Ultimately, it is people who respond to conflict, and the choices are always clear. To be able to adequately deal with conflict, one must first be at peace with himself in order to engage and understand the other.
2003, the peace initiative that is occurring for 20 working days throughout in Martin Place at the moment relates to the 20th of the 3rd, 2003, which was when Australia became aware that the United States government had invaded Iraq. 2003 peace initiative came out of Marrickville Peace Group, and the idea spread through over 20 peace groups in Sydney, all of whom have participated in collecting signatures on letters to the President of the United States, asking him to speak with his enemies and negotiate dialogue for peace.
And I say himself quite consciously. It is the Julius Caesars, Macbeths, Alexanders, Winston Churchills, all of whom are men that have not only waged and participated in wars, but have been in positions of authority and control to be able to prevent them. And it is left to the women of the world to wash those soiled hands of the blood that has stained them, vividly recalling Lady Macbeth's cry, "Out, damn spot, out, I say," as she desperately tries to rid herself of the shame and guilt in succumbing to the violence which was a result of the battle for power and dominance in what was ultimately a man's world. Her guilt had become such that she sees the physical manifestations in the appearance of bloodstains upon her hands of this guilt which she could not wash out. So too, many women have and do still bear the ultimate burden of trying to bring normality back into their lives and their communities after the devastation of war.
Women in Black started in Israel by Israeli Jewish women in '88, immediately following the first Palestinian Intifada. It started as a weekly vigil in Israel, and soon there were over 40 groups of Jewish women standing on a weekly basis, speaking out against the Intifada and the occupation of Palestine. In northern Israel, where there was a greater Arabic population, Israeli Palestinian women quickly, within weeks, were joining in these vigils as well.
We women have a responsibility, especially in this country. In this country, Muslim, Jew, Christian, atheist, it doesn't matter what your background is. You can read, you can write, you can speak, and you can act. And it is time, I believe, that women took more of an active role in the society, not just in the politics, but in the home and in the ethnic communities and in the wider Australian community, to have their voices and their ideas and their beliefs heard.
Women in Black quickly became a worldwide movement in places like Bosnia, Croatia, United States, Italy, Canada, all throughout Europe, the UK, where women asked for a peaceful way of resolving conflict.
We have a common platform, and we are all concerned about the way that our world is going and about the issues that affect society. And we are not at war with each other. And in fact, we can talk to each other better than the politicians. I dream that it will happen, and I believe the way that it will not happen is if we sit and talk to each other and understand that there are many people with many issues and many real grievances, and that these grievances can be solved.
On the 4th September 1995, over 3,000 women in black stood at the United Nations World Conference for Women in Beijing. Women in Black received a Millennium Women's Peace Prize, and in 2001 we were nominated, Women in Black, were nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize.
I'm not going to spend very long speaking to you today because I believe actions speak louder than words. I hope that you will act. I hope that you women will stand up and think, become more educated about the issues facing society. And particularly as women, we have an incredibly powerful role as mothers, as wives, as sisters, and when we get ourselves moving as politicians, writers, teachers, and rebels. I look forward to seeing the change that could happen in our society that people like you will bring about because you have acted. Thank you.
Women in Black Sydney have a regular peaceful vigil on the steps of Sydney Town Hall on the first Thursday of every month from 6 till 7. All women are welcome to attend, and men have stood with us as well. We wear black as it's our cultural colour of mourning. We remain quiet. We might talk among ourselves, but we do not involve with any comments that we get from people passing by.
Oh, is that what it was?
Anyone interested in peace and justice, Jewish, Palestinian, Aboriginal, white Australian, male or female, young or old, are welcome to join us. So it's the first Thursday of every month at 6 o'clock that we meet on the steps of Sydney Town Hall. You may only be able to stand for half an hour, but our presence, our silent presence, is very obvious to passers by. Will you please stand now, and we'll have 1 minute silence as we consider the women of Afghanistan, the women in refugee camps, the women in Vietnam who are still giving birth to children deformed by the chemicals that went into that country, and all those other women who suffer violence, either in war or in the home. You can check out the global movement of Women in Black at www.womeninblack.org.
In Mind the Gap, I've considered the ever-widening gap between static belief systems and the evolving world of modern science. Actually, our brains are full of gaps called synapses. There are billions of them, and thought messages run across them from one neuron to the next at lightning speed. Also, the world outside is full of gaps, so my gap-centered thoughts proved to be highly productive, and has led to a different way of thinking about almost everything. But the effort of doing so was considerable. Elements of what I'm saying can be found in previous books of mine, but I realised they needed to be brought together in a single volume. I was pushed into doing what became a marathon task as I listened to the fortnightly lectures on philosophy which were organised by the Philosophy Forum in Blackheath during 2002. 2002, I think. Yes. In my mind, there was a gaping hole in what was being said as the lecturers gave accounts of the surviving texts of classical Greek thinkers and their later followers. None of these texts are complete, by the way, and they've had an extraordinarily checkered history, but did not relate them to the present day or even point out what we now know as appalling inaccuracies. My different way of thinking about everything led me to look for a different pathway through historical belief systems. I now call this pathway the golden thread, which lay hidden beneath the weight of the patriarchal superstructure and connected the philosophy of the ancient Cretans with the present day. The chapters in my book, therefore, are like beads along the chain of the golden thread. I made no attempt to be inclusive in what I say about known male philosophers, they're almost all male, of the last 2,500 years, but there are plenty of other sources for those wishing to read about them. We all live with a myriad gaps in our brains and outside. We cross the gaps to make meaningful patterns, like the game of Join the Dots. Have you ever enjoyed that game where all these dots? I love it. But the brain loves it too. It's really lovely. It's just what the brain is doing. And everyone makes different patterns as we draw in different dots. This is how our brains work. It means that we live with myths of our own making, as we retrieve memories and reinvent them. But our memories are not accurate, and our retrieval systems are imperfect. So our myths, as well as being unique to ourselves, keep changing. This very imperfect process is in fact an important key to our survival, as it means we can adapt to changing circumstances. But it also means that there's no such thing as permanent, unchanging truth. Our thoughts evolve. In fact, everything evolves. So if everything changes, how can there be a golden thread running between different civilizations from 1,500 years BC to the present day? Well, the golden thread that I perceive is life seen from a characteristically female point of view. Not, of course, that there's a single universal female point of view, but I do think we use our brains differently and therefore see things slightly differently from the male. It would be truer to say that the male perceives things slightly differently from the female. The golden thread is recognizable since its many strands have been, as it were, compacted and enclosed within successive patriarchally biased civilizations. Brought to light, we find an alternative philosophy that needs to be recognized, in my view, if we want to bring fresh thoughts to bear on the current world situation. This is what my book is attempting to do. Perhaps you now understand why I got brain fever and why I have prepared this introduction instead of talking directly. I'm still slightly damaged, actually. Both reason and words are functional and cannot exist on their own. We use them for many purposes. How we use them is more interesting than trying to make endless attempts at precise definitions. Our capacity to reason and words, and with them an increasing sense of consciousness, came late in the process of experiencing our situation as sentient beings, who each of us live for a short time on this planet. And of course our bodies, including our brains, are as subject to evolution as any other animal species. This is so whether we try to influence evolution by, for instance, genetic engineering, or whether our lives and deaths are subject to forces beyond our control, such as earthquakes. Evolutionary adaptation works between generations, and because no two life forms are identical even within species. To take Charles Darwin's example of the finches in the Galapagos Islands, those finches born with shorter, stubbier beaks do better and raise more offspring on an island where seeds are plentiful all the year round, in which case more young with stubby beaks are born. But finches with longer, thinner beaks do better and raise more offspring on another island where insects are plentiful and they can probe to get them, in which case more of their offspring inherit long, thin beaks. And in time, therefore, these finches which stay on their islands, and this is what Charles Darwin noticed, have these characteristically different beaks. We therefore have to be careful how we use the word adaptation, which we like to think of as individuals adapting to different environments. Human beings may be somewhat more adaptable than finches' beaks, but most adaptation still comes from separate populations developing different ways of life, some of which are more successful than others. To bring this point home, I will be wasting my time arguing at length with classical academic philosophers about our different points of view. It is not a question of which of us might be right or wrong in the abstract, which is the sort of argument that goes on endlessly in universities, but which of us is providing more useful pointers, albeit with reference to earlier thinkers, for people living here and now. It seems to me that classical academic philosophers have become self-defeating. I see them as a flock of birds that build ever more precise nests, watched ever more critically by the other birds, but they fail to lay any eggs in them. I would therefore like to see a new faculty in universities called creative philosophy. I suggest humbly that my book Mind the Gap would make a useful beginning for discussion in that faculty. At the moment there are only 200 copies of Mind the Gap available, and I suggest this is your opportunity to capture one. Dimmocks have read the book and like it and will distribute it, but more copies will have to be made for it to reach a wider public. I'm actually in need of a literary agent and a publisher to carry this forward, so I should be grateful if anyone can help. There you are.
Favourite philosophy?
Your favourite?
Oh, I see. Well, my favourite philosopher of the classical Greeks is Epicurus, the Epicureans, because they looked as well as tried to make theories up. And the thing that really hurts me is that they noticed that babies took after their mothers as well as their fathers. Now, if that had been mainstream, we would never have had this completely ridiculous thing that men plant their seed in the female earth, which is the basis of all mainstream philosophy and all the religions. The person who discovered the egg, von Baer, Karl Ernst von Baer, isn't known. I mean, how many people, apart from me saying, does anyone know about Karl Ernst von Baer? And yet he discovered the egg, and at that point, women in 1827 should have put up their hands and said, "We've got the egg, mate." And they didn't. It's not just the problem about women hadn't sort of been used to thinking for themselves, but von Baer himself had a nervous breakdown after he found it, because he realised that it was another nail in the religious coffin, and he couldn't do what Charles Darwin did, which is weather the storm. He himself was religious. He was very upset. He'd been looking for the egg. I mean, you know, it was his work, he was doing it. But when he found it, he realised it was going to change everything. Well, actually it didn't, because his research only seeped out gradually in medical papers. It never became a popular issue.